For most of human history, seas did not simply disappear. Sure, they shifted, flooded, or even retreated slowly over millennia. And certainly, coastlines have changed by meters, but not kilometers. And in these extended periods of time, both man and nature was able to adjust. But in the second half of the 20th century, one of the largest bodies of water on Earth broke that pattern. The disappearance of the Aral Sea stands as one of the most dramatic examples of human-induced environmental transformation in the modern world. Within the span of a single human lifetime, a vast inland sea, once ranked as the fourth largest in the world, was reduced to a series of fragmented bodies surrounded by desert. Fishing fleets became stranded, coastal towns were abandoned, and ecosystems that had existed for thousands of years collapsed with an alarming speed. Unlike many environmental crises, the destruction of the Aral Sea was neither accidental nor inevitable. It was the result of a deliberate political and economic decision grounded in ideological certainty and reinforced by large-scale engineering. And today we examine how the Aral Sea was transformed from a stable and productive hydrological system into an ecological disaster. So let's explore. The Aral Sea was located in Central Asia, straddling the border between present-day Kazakhstan to the north and Uzbekistan to the south. It occupied a shallow depression within the arid and semi-arid region, dominated by deserts such as the Karakum and the Kizilkum. Despite this aridity, the sea persisted for millennia due to the inflow of two major rivers, the Amu Darya and the Siri Darya. Both rivers originate in high mountain ranges, the Pamirs and the Tian Shan, where glaciers and semi-seasonal snowmelt provide a relatively reliable source of water. Historically, this inflow balanced evaporation from the Aral Sea surface, allowing the sea to maintain a relatively stable level despite the absence of an outlet to the ocean. Such basins are known as endorheic systems, with their stability depending entirely on the balance between inflow and evaporation. By the mid-20th century, the Aral Sea covered approximately 68,000 square kilometers. Its waters were only moderately saline, with salt concentrations significantly lower than those of the open ocean, measuring at about 10 grams per litre. This allowed the sea to support a diverse ecosystem, including several commercially valuable fish species. The surrounding wetlands and deltas further enhanced the biodiversity, providing habitat for birds and other wildlife, while also supporting agriculture and fishing communities. Archaeological and geological evidence suggests that the modern Aral Sea stabilized somewhere between 15 and 20,000 years ago, following shifts in river courses that directed sustained inflow into the basin. While the sea experienced natural fluctuations over time, these changes occurred gradually and did not fundamentally threaten its existence. Human societies adapted to these variations, developing livelihoods that depended on fishing, small-scale irrigation, and trade. And by the early 20th century, the Aral Sea had become an integral part of the regional economy. Fishing ports such as Moynak and Aralsk were active industrial centers, complete with processing plants and transport links to other parts of the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. Annual fish catches would often reach tens of thousands of tons, supplying markets far beyond Central Asia. The sea also played an important climatic role. Its large surface area moderated temperature extremes, cooling summers and warming winters in surrounding regions. This climatic stabilization supported agriculture and helped sustain human settlement in an otherwise harsh environment. In short, the Aral Sea was not a marginal or failing ecosystem prior to the Soviet intervention. It was a functioning, productive system that endured for millennia. The transformation of the Aral Sea began in the context of Soviet central planning. Following the Second World War, the Soviet Union sought to rapidly industrialize and modernize its economy, while achieving self-sufficiency in key commodities. Cotton emerged as a strategic priority, often referred to as white gold, and cotton was essential for the Soviet textile industry, and reliance on imports was seen as politically and economically undesirable. Central Asia, particularly Uzbekistan, was identified as the ideal region for large-scale cotton cultivation. The area offered vast expanses of flat areas and long growing seasons. The primary limitation was water. Cotton is an extremely water-intensive crop, requiring substantial irrigation to achieve high yields in arid climates. To overcome this limitation, Soviet planners turned to the region's major rivers. Beginning in the 1950s and accelerating through the 1960s, extensive irrigation projects were launched to divert water from the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya into agricultural fields. Canals were constructed across deserts and plains, redirecting river flow on an unprecedented scale. These projects were celebrated as triumphs of socialist engineering, symbolizing humanity's ability to reshape nature in service of economic progress. While irrigation itself was not inherently destructive, the scale and execution of Soviet projects proved catastrophic. Many canals were poorly designed and inadequately maintained. Unlined channels allowed vast quantities of water to seep into the ground, where it evaporated or became saline groundwater unsuitable for agriculture. Evaporation losses were further exacerbated by dry and hot climate conditions. It's believed that in some of the irrigation systems, more than half of the diverted water failed to reach its intended destination. Yet despite these inefficiencies, agricultural expansion continued. Production targets were prioritized over environmental considerations, and local officials were rewarded for meeting quotas rather than conserving resources. As more water was diverted upstream, less reached the Aral Sea. Initially, the effects were subtle and easily dismissed as natural variations. However, by the late 1960s and early 1970s, water levels began to fall noticeably. Shorelines retreated, and as the water volume decreased, the salinity would increase. Soviet scientists and engineers were not unaware of these trends. Internal reports warned of potential consequences, including collapse of fisheries and regional climate change. Nevertheless, the prevailing ideology held that the economic benefit of the agricultural expansion outweighed the environmental cost. Some officials even argued that the Aral Sea itself was wasteful, describing the evaporation as a loss of valuable water that could be better used for crops. Between 1960 and 1988, the Aral Sea lost more than 60% of its surface area and approximately 80% of its volume. By the early 21st century, it had fragmented into several smaller bodies of water, most notably the North Aral Sea and the South Aral Sea. The southern basin continued to shrink, eventually splitting into eastern and western remnants. And as water declined, salinity rose sharply. Many fish species couldn't survive the changing conditions, leading to the collapse of the fishing industry. Processing plants closed, fleets were abandoned, and communities that had depended on this sea for generations were left without livelihoods. The exposed seabed revealed layers of salt, agricultural chemicals, and industrial pollutants that had accumulated over decades. Winds carried the toxic dust across the region, contaminating soil, crops, and water sources far beyond the former shoreline. What had once been a life-sustaining environment had become a source of ongoing environmental harm. The human cost of the Aral Sea was severe and long-lasting. Unemployment soared as fisheries collapsed and related industries shut down. Many residents were forced to migrate in search of work, leaving behind depopulated towns and villages, all while public health deteriorated rapidly. Dust storms laden with salt and pesticides contributed to high rates of respiratory illness, including asthma and bronchitis. Contaminated water supplies were linked to gastrointestinal diseases, all while cancer rates and infant mortality increased significantly in affected regions. Medical infrastructure, already limited, struggled to cope with the growing burden of disease. Then there was the social cohesion, which also suffered. Communities that had been built around shared economic and cultural ties to the sea were now fragmented. Traditional knowledge and practices associated with fishing and water management were now lost, further undermining the resilience of the area. The ecological consequences of the Aral Sea's disappearance extended far beyond the losses of a single body of water. The former seabed became known as the Aralkum Desert, one of the youngest deserts in the world. This new desert continues to expand, contributing to regional dust storms and altering climate patterns. Wetlands and river deltas that had supported diverse plants and animal life dried up, leading to widespread biodiversity losses. Migratory bird populations declined as stopover habitats disappeared. Soil salinity reduced agricultural productivity, creating a vicious cycle of environmental degradation and economic hardship. The collapse of the Aral Sea thus represents a systematic ecological failure, in which interconnected natural processes were disrupted on a massive scale. Throughout the later decades of the Soviet Union, official responses to the Aral Sea crisis were characterized by denial and delay. Acknowledging the scale of a disaster would have required admitting fundamental flaws in central planning and agricultural policy. As a result, information was often suppressed and public discussion was limited. Ambitious proposals, however, were put forward to reverse the damage, including plans to divert water from Siberian rivers to replenish the Aral Sea. These schemes, however, were extraordinarily expensive and technically complex. Ultimately, they were abandoned and considered impractical, particularly as the Soviet economy began to stagnate. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the newly independent states inherited an environmental catastrophe without the resource or institutional capacity to address it fully. However, there is something else. The Aral Sea's retreat exposed something more than just ecological damage. In the southern basin of the sea lay Vozrozhdenia Island, a landmass that was once completely isolated by water. During the Cold War, this isolation made it an ideal site for one of the Soviet Union's most secret military research facilities, Aralsk 7. Aralsk 7 was a closed scientific and military settlement operated as part of the Soviet biological weapons program. The site was used for large-scale field testing of highly dangerous pathogens, including anthrax, plague, and smallpox. These tests were conducted in open-air conditions, with the surrounding waters of the Aral Sea serving as a natural contaminant barrier. The sea's vastness and remoteness were assumed to limit civilian exposure and prevent the spread of contamination beyond the test zone. However, this assumption depended entirely on the continued existence of the sea itself. And as the irrigation projects diverted the rivers, the water levels fell. Vozrozhdenia Island gradually lost its isolation, and by the late 20th century, the island had become physically connected to the mainland, eliminating the geographical separation that had once justified its use as a testing ground. Following the dissolution of the USSR in 1991, Aralsk 7 was abandoned. Laboratory test sites and contaminated areas were left unsecured in a rapidly changing landscape. International concerns emerged over the possibility that biological agents could be exposed to human or animal populations. In response, joint contaminant and remediation efforts were undertaken in the late 1990s and early 2000s to neutralize remaining hazards. And if you would like a video on that, please do let me know down in the comments. By the early 2000s, Kazakhstan undertook efforts to stabilize and partially restore the North Aral Sea. The construction of the Koch Aral Dam helped retain water in the northern basin, reducing salinity and allowing some fish species to return. Fishing resumed on a limited scale, and the local climate conditions improved modestly. So, what lessons, if any, are there? Well, the destruction of the Aral Sea offers a profound insight about environmental governance and the limits of large-scale planning. It demonstrates how systems that prioritize short-term economic gains over long-term sustainability can help produce irreversible damage, highlighting the dangers of suppressing scientific dissent and treating nature as this infinitely malleable resource. And perhaps most importantly, the Aral Sea reminds us that the environmental disasters are often not sudden or accidental. They emerge gradually through a series of decisions that appear rational in isolation, but prove catastrophic in combination. So while the Aral Sea did not fully disappear, it is a shadow of its former self. A shadow made not of natural forces beyond human control. Instead, it shrunk because of deliberate choices made in the pursuit of economic and ideological goals. Its destruction was neither inevitable nor unforeseeable. Scientists warned of the consequences, communities experienced the impacts firsthand, and yet the system persisted until the collapse was unavoidable. Today, the Aral Sea stands as a stark reminder of costs of environmental mismanagement. While partial restoration offers some hope, much of what is lost cannot be recovered. The legacy of the Aral Sea is therefore not only one of tragedy, but also of responsibility, a warning to future generations about the consequences of ignoring the delicate balance between human ambition and the natural world. Thank you for watching.